Good morning.
This is Bob Brown. Welcome to B Cube Sunday morning. I got an echo somewhere. I don't know, but
No. Let me see if I mute myself, if it takes the echo off here. I'll mute, and you'll see if the echo goes.
okay. But it's okay. I mean, I live on Facebook too, and talk about an echo chamber. Yoo-hoo! But anyway, it is a good day to be here. Um, we got Tom Whitmore is going to do Tom Whitmore and his friends with us today. And one of his friends here is an old friend, Kevin Andrew Murphy.
Oh, he's not that old.
Say that again?
He's not that old.
Oh, no, but the amount of time we've known each other, I think it's at least 30 years at this point.
Yeah.
You've got more time with him. I've only known him for probably 15, and that's it from conventions. But I am going to just make a couple of quick notices that says BQ Press is going to be somewhere very soon. We've got a dealer's table, and we're doing some programming, I think. Oh, shit, I got to fill out that, excuse me. Oh, darn. I need to fill out that form. But going to be in Tonopah for Westercon. And with that said, I would like to turn it over to Tom because Tom has run more cons than I've probably been to. How many cons have you run, Tom?
Well, I've only chaired 2, but I've worked on a lot more than that, and I lost track many, many years ago.
But well, there's worse things to lose track of because cons are full of good people and fun times. And I will leave it at that. And so I'm going to bid you adieu to take care of Kevin and enjoy.
So the reason we've got
Bob for being behind the scenes.
Yes. The reason we've got Kevin on is he is the guest of honor for Westercon this year. And Westercon goes back to 1948. I
don't. 18 years before I do.
Yeah. 5 years before me, but yeah. It's been an amazing convention. It has a lot of guests of honor. I've even been a Westercon guest of honor back 40 years ago almost, which is kind of frightening. I had to look it up to figure out what year it was. But because of that, we're going to talk about conventions. We're going to talk about writing. We're going to talk about Kevin and his history. And we're going to have just general good conversation. We're also going to talk some about Nevada because, Kevin, you live in Nevada now.
Yep. I moved out here right at the beginning of the pandemic. Actually, I'd been splitting my time living in Lovelock, Nevada, where my father was living for a number of years, and then splitting my time with the Bay Area, but then ended up selling my house in San Jose and moved to Reno and had my dad move in with me. And basically everything was good until it wasn't last summer. He passed away, but so I'm right now here in Reno.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever been to Tonopah?
Yeah, I've actually been to Tonopah a number of times. My sister's a doctor, and she was working out there, and she put me up at the Mizpah to come out and visit her while she was working. And then we went out to the turquoise mine with a couple of my cousins from Germany, and we got to go mine for turquoise out in the desert. That was a fun thing, and basically it was a good time. We also did the Mizpah Hotel where the convention will be taking place, and they have the lady in red who's the ghost of the call girl lady of the evening who supposedly haunts a few of the rooms.
Have you seen the ghost?
I have not seen the ghost, but I have seen some interesting flickers on my camera in the hall, and we took a couple of pictures and going like, that doesn't look like lens flare, so there may be something here.
Cool. I actually went through Tonopah because I drove to Comdex from San Francisco, which was in Las Vegas, and discovered that I was going through Tehachapi. And I'm looking at the map and said, wait a minute, if I go up the west side of Nevada driving home, I can drive from Tehachapi to Tonopah.
Yeah, actually, the last time I was in Tonopah was actually staying the night at the Mizpah. On the way out, Pat McEwen and Elizabeth Gilligan passed away. But we were out on a road trip to Kansas City, and so we stopped in Tonopah on the way there.
That's not quite the same direction, unless you were coming from the San Francisco area.
Well, basically went up through San Francisco, went through Truckee, and then headed down through and across that way.
Okay. Yeah. When I was driving that, we went through. I went through Lee Vining and Mono Lake area.
Yeah.
The only time I've ever been driving for 2 hours at rush hour time, 5 in the evening, and seen no other cars at all. But what led you to become a Westercon guest of honor? Is this your first time as a guest of honor at a major convention, or not?
Yeah, actually,
as major as it used to be.
Yeah, this is actually the first time I've been a guest of honor at a major convention. I mean, honestly, I think first time, second time as a guest of honor, in that back in college, Slugathon, which was our local college convention, gaming and so forth, it was like going like, wait, we've got an author here. And so it had me as the, college type guest of honor. Though, of course, Slugathon then later on became a regular gaming convention after college. So had that, and then there was the Mexico City Fantasy Arts Festival a number of years ago, where they had me and Poppy Z. Bright and Krista Faust and a few other people out as, I think we were sort of like multiple guests of honor, and basically guests from America. But so yeah, this is basically my first guest of honor gig, and certainly most major con.
Cool. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
You've been putting in the time for quite a while now, and it's nice to see you getting a little bit more recognition.
Yeah. I was thrilled when I got the message from Kevin Stanley, like, would you like to be guest of honor? It's like, yes.
Revere Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is an interesting thing to be chosen as a guest for this sort of thing. And, it's an experience, and I hope that you have a great time with it. But
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Westercon's had a long history. As I say, it started in '48. You can go look it up in the Fancyclopedia page if you want to really get a sense of how broad it's been and how strange it's been, because it's been through some interesting times.
Yeah, I actually think that my first major convention was actually a Westercon. I went when I was 19 to Westercon in San Diego. I don't know which year that was, but it was probably, I'm guessing probably 86 or so. So I'd have to look at whenever the
it was 80. There was one there in '86 with David Brin as guest of honor, and
yep, it was San Diego. So that was actually my first major convention. That was actually even before I did Baycon, which is unfortunately opposite Westercon. And they invited me, and I said, yeah, fortunately I can't do by location yet. Otherwise, I would love to go.
These days, with the amount of stuff that's being done virtually, people really can do by location.
Yeah, I guess we're doing it right now here. Is it you're up in Oregon at the moment?
Seattle. Actually, Renton at the moment.
Okay, so you're in Washington, yeah.
Yes, Washington State. And you're in Las Vegas.
No, actually, I'm in Reno, Nevada.
Reno. Yes. Ah, well. So, what are you working on these days? What are you writing? I mean, you're a guest because of your writing mostly, though you are a wonderful person anyway, and I have an anecdote or two of that.
Okay. Well, for the writing end, I think I can do the quick show and tell. Is that I write a lot for George R. R. Martin's Wildcard series, so I could do the quick show and tell. My character Captain Flint, and I had the lead story in Knaves Over Queens, which came out a couple years ago. This is the first American edition. It was originally coming out in Britain for our first of our British series, and then. It was a kind of interesting thing is that my very first intro to Wild Cards, which I'm very proud of this, I didn't actually have the story in here, but my character, Hearn the Huntsman, got on the cover and just got reissued. So it was like an amazing picture of him, and, writing a bit, hoping to have his story out with him at some point. and I've got another story. I don't jinx things. I basically only talk about the stories that are accepted. So we've got one of the new anthologies in the pipeline that's been announced. Is called Pairing Up, and I've got a story in there that's a historic wild card story. And Pairing Up is going to be our wild cards pairing up with different characters as romance. So it's the wild cards romance volume.
Okay. Yeah. But George R. R. Martin really did do something before doing Game of Thrones. So
Oh yes,
many things, but Wild Card is one of them.
yeah.
And it's always been a fun series. And most of your writing seems to be in other people's universes, either a game universe or wild cards or something similar to that. How's that different from writing something that's nominally your own?
Well, I've actually done a good bit of my own universes, though unfortunately, I haven't sold. I've got let's see, 4 unpublished novels, but it's a case where, but I've sold stories in some of those universes to various anthologies. So I've had the Isle of California stories, and I think let's see, the Croquet Mallet Murders came out in I Vampire years ago, and then there was another story that I had in Catherine Carr's Sorceries or The Shimmering Door, depending on whether you're in the UK or the US for publication. It was interesting. So I've had a couple of the stories set in that universe there, and various other anthologies. But then, I started out with wild cards very, very early on because I got into it for gaming. I had a chance to write the second wild cards game book after Steve Perrin wasn't able to write it. And then I got the gig with Steve Jackson, and George liked what he saw and jumped me into the gang so that he could, play with my characters. And that's how Hearn got on the cover. And then Cameo came in as well, and I've written a story with her for Inside Straight, and lots of stuff there. And then at the same time, Stuart Wick was a friend of mine. We'd both been writing for Talislanta, and then he started up White Wolf magazine. I wrote some for that, and then that became White Wolf Games, and I came in as one of the main writers for Mage. And my character Penny Dreadful became very, very popular, and so I wrote a novel with her. And actually, one of the fun things was that a few years ago they did the Mage 20th anniversary Kickstarter and used her as $1 million stretch goal, which I wish that there was like more something coming to me from that. That it's the trouble of work for hire and various other things with the game industry. But it was something where I talked with them, and they said, thank you for putting me there. And they said, don't thank us, thank the fans. We listened to the boards, and everyone said we want to have Penny back in print. So like, okay, good on the fans.
One of our listeners has, in fact, was around that game and involved with it, which is kind of cool.
Oh, cool.
Andrew Lucas.
Don't
know whether you ran across Andrew in those days or not, but who knows?
Yeah, may or may not have. It's one of the crazy things is that most of the White Wolf crew were all out in Georgia, and I was like the spur out in California in the Bay Area. It was actually kind of the same thing as with Wild Cards, where it was the New Mexico Mafia who was running it, and the only Bay Area members were me and Steve Perrin. And actually, Steve unfortunately passed away last year, but he finally got to write his first actual story in Joker Moon, which is and had a nice bit where his character gets to live on.
Yeah, I remember Steve from his days in the SCA back in the late '60s. So, in fact, I bought my first copy of Out of Space and Time by Clark Ashton Smith from him, which is one of those totally weird connections.
I think I've got a copy of that I've got somewhere on my shelves or somewhere. There's a Clark Ashton Smith's Space Stories. I think it's like called Star or something or another. It's got a black mine. I find where I could put it, but you probably know the book I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. But my memory is being less
Mhm.
than it used to, and it's not leaping out. Anyway, so the story that I was going to tell is a story about my partner,
Mhm.
um, who is not on here today but is listening. And she was doing a critique group at a convention, and you were one of the people doing the critiquing of her
Mhm.
story. And she'd been working on the convention with me and ended up sleeping in. And you telephoned her to get
Mhm.
her to the critique thing because you really wanted to meet the person who'd written the story.
Mhm.
You dragged her out of something and were really incredibly supportive to her right when she was starting out as a writer.
Oh, well, I'm glad she wrote a very, very good story. I think that was actually the Worldcon in San Jose, I think.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. But no, I know how important critiques are, and it was also a bit where it's like it was a really, really good story. I think honestly the best one in the workshop, and like she needs to be here. We need to go over this, need to show everyone it's like this is how it's done.
Yes. Well, she came late to writing fiction, but has been writing all her life.
Mm.
And I want to thank you for being so supportive of her. And I'm sure you've been as supportive for other people through the years. I just don't know those stories. So, but
Yeah.
this is part of why you deserve to be a guest of honor, is because
Well, thank you.
you pay back to the field.
Yeah. I try to be supportive, but I also have a bit where critique groups is like it's a case of we're being professionals here. There's a bit of being supportive of somebody when they're starting out, so it's like praise the praise them a little bit. But if something is not good and it's not working, I will tell people because that's what my editors have done for me.
Yeah.
It's worst thing is to say,
Honestly,
"Oh, this was very, very nice, but I don't want it," when you really didn't like it at all.
honesty is much more useful than kindness
Yeah.
for a writer. And sometimes it didn't work for me, but I can see how it would work for someone else.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, I've got sales that go on that. And matter of fact, even it's a case where it was a bit of honesty roundabout. It's like when I first got into wild cards, it was about the same time as Sage Walker came in.
Mm.
And I called her from the payphone at I think it was like the Tucson World Fantasy to welcome her to the group, find out about her characters and so forth. And then we got to talking and like, well, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm writing an Elvis is stolen by the elves story. And she said, oh, is that for Paul Salmon's anthology? And I'm going like, no, who's Paul Salmon? What's this anthology? And Paul had this anthology that was then titled Die Elvis Die. It later on got retitled The King is Dead, Tales of Elvis Postmortem, because he got Joyce Carol Oates and Harlan Ellison to write stories and a few other big names, some up-and-comers. And
Well, you had
so,
a Joe Lansdale story in there too, which got
oh,
made
yeah,
into a movie.
yep, that, Joe Lansdale. So it was like,
Bubba
lots of,
Hotep, yes.
yeah, yeah, Bubba Hotep. So I ended up calling Paul Salmon after. Well, anyway, Sage had told me it's like, well, is it for that? She says, I said, well, how'd you find out about it? Says, well, you're not supposed to know about it, but I wasn't either. And so she mentioned that a big name editor, who I won't mention because I will not mention the story, but anyway, Sage had sent her an Elvis story, and she had said, this isn't something that I can use, but Paul Salmon probably could use it. And so Sage sent it to Paul. Paul didn't take it, but I got Paul's phone number, and then I ended up calling Paul and saying, do you have an Elvis story stolen by the Elvis story? And he said, no, not really, but basically decided whatever the secret handshakes had been done,
Mhm.
and he allowed me to submit the story. He loved it. He bought it. I get to be with book alongside Joe Lansdale and Joyce Carol Oates, Harlan Ellison. That was great. And then he later on bought a story of mine that Tom Roach and I wrote for Splatterpunks 2, and then that later on got picked up by Glenn Danzig for Veronica 12. So that's in the original fiction end. So it's I do a lot of my own worlds and small stories here and there, hoping some of them will be picked up for movies. The only one that I've had a movie deal with so far has been Clove Smoke, where they did a small movie and then the production ended up dying in the middle of it because it was there were a bunch of film students with money and then problems happened. But at a certain point, I think they may end up ringing me again and saying, "Hi, we've suddenly want to go back to this old project." We'll see.
Yes, but is there a difference between writing in other people's universes and writing in your own? To get back to what I started to ask at the beginning of this, do you feel different about them?
I do and I don't. And I think part of the thing is that I have a lot of stories that I want to tell. And a lot of the universes that I write in are universes which are a type of universe. I mean, Wild Cards, I love it, and it has its own very, very unique take on the superhero genre, but it is a superhero genre story.
Yeah.
And then there are also lots of stories that are told within it. World of Darkness is the same way. I remember, I think Don Basingthwaite, back in the day when I wrote my first Penny Dreadful story, said he was one of the other authors, and he ended up saying that he was in the bookstore reading the anthology, and he suddenly went, "Oh my God, somebody actually wrote a comedy in the World of Darkness." And he was laughing out loud as he was going through the whole thing, because part of my whole bit with the World of Darkness is I love it as a setting. It's it's a very dark noir 80s take on the world of vampires and werewolves and mages and so forth. But I was going like, well, what if there was a perky goth who suddenly got awakened to magic and realized, oh, everything is like it really is in the fairy tales, and I'm dealing with this ancient hag who's doing the "I will turn myself into a beautiful sex kitten," and so of course she just dealt with it as 80s snark. It's like, well, somebody's oil of Olay was certainly working well, and and later on, calls Jodie Blake saying, "Just who do you think are you dealing with, child?" And Penny's answer is Bimbo Yaga, which really, but really that it was accurate, and I got to write it as an epistolary with Penny's commentary, saying it's like, and this woman was obviously around before feminism. If I was 500 years old and still dressing up as a sex kitten, I'd think I'd have some serious issues, but I won't even go there.
Yes.
Right. And so it was just this fun thing to write, and it was a bit, but part of the whole thing of the World of Darkness is that if you have a dark world, people who grow up in it are not going to necessarily get the memo. They're just going to deal with it with the tools at hand. And 80s snark and perky goths are still around, and that's exactly what they're going to, view the world as, like, oh, there's magic, but there's also people with a lot of issues. And just being an ancient witch does not mean that this woman does not have serious issues.
Yes, everybody's just dying over the phrase Bimbo Yaga.
Yes, and honestly, I wrote that when I was in my 20s, so I'm glad that it has legs.
Yes. Cool. So,
but anyway, that gets into the whole bit of like, why do I like writing things in other worlds? Well, part of the thing with the shared world anthology is that you get to everybody else has done the dark and grim. You can do ahead and do the funny story set into it, and I've done that with Wild Cards too, because Wild Cards has a lot of dark and grim, but I've written funny stories in it. Paul Cornell has done some really funny stories in it. Carrie Vaughn did a YA set in Wild Cards, and
Mhm.
part of the whole thing is if you grow up in the world, you're going to just look at it as this is normal.
Yeah. The Howard Waldrop piece in the very first Wild Cards anthology was, in fact, quite funny.
Oh yeah.
Um, and that's one of the wonderful things about it. It is large, it contains multitudes.
Hmm. Yeah, it's basically the whole universe, and we've got it actually in development right now at Peacock, and I can't say anything more about that because, well, George and Melinda haven't told me anything more. But I'm certain that I will hear something at some point, and then have to pretend that I don't know anything until it is officially announced.
Yes, well, now you can pretend you do know something that you don't know and that you can't say anything about it, so you have to pretend you don't know anything.
Mm.
Publishing gets very convoluted sometimes.
Mhm.
Yes. So, what are you looking forward to in terms of Westercon?
Let's see.
You know.
Well, I got a lot of panels. I've got two games I'm going to be running. One of them is Wild Cards. The other one is going to be D&D, set in my own little D&D universe. Um, I think it's going to be the Menagerie of Dr. Bombastus. That is the
Mhm.
title of that adventure, and that gets into a lot of the stuff. I'm still doing things for gaming, so I've been writing a lot for Sigil, which is part of Savage Worlds, and I've been doing fiction for the S5E superheroes series that came out as Kickstarter, but that's going along. But also, I've written a lot of fiction for them before. One for a Weird Wars uh, anthology that was not Sean Patrick Hazlitt's, who is a different editor who I've got two stories in. It's one of which has to do with Baba Yaga, actually. So there's basically I do lots of different things. I think I should say, sort of go skipping around. It's like, well, Baba Yaga's in here, but then I've had Weird Wars for the Wendigo Tales line, as well as for Sean's books from Bane, and then I've also done. Let's see, well, uh, getting on into the gaming end, there's a lot of fifth edition D&D things that are also coming out from Sigil, and I'm working on some of them, and also doing some editing too. So that's an extra hat that you won't see me doing that regularly, but you know, as your partner knows, I know how to critique stories, and so I've also jumped into editing right now for
Mhm.
a gaming publisher.
Yeah. So you're going to be running these two campaigns at
Mhm.
Westercon. Are they going to be open to people who have no experience? Are they going to be good for people who have no experience with playing either D&D or a Wild Cards RPG?
Um, I'd say that they'll be as good as any game coming in first time. Is basically is, can you play a superhero? Then Wild Cards is good for you. I mean, there's a little bit of extra background to what goes on with the Wild Cards universe, but I can quickly summarize it as back in 1946, aliens dropped the wild card virus you know on Manhattan, and it was actually Dr. Todd, various other little small things,
Yeah.
but it was basically an alien virus, and 9 out of 10 people who get it die. And of the 10% of survivors, 9 out of 10 of those get mutated in some ways, and those are called
Mutated in rather difficult ways.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, it can be difficult ways to kind of trivial and stupid ways,
Yeah.
and then the last 1% you can get powers, get a cool superpower, and those are called aces. But then we have other little things, like there are deuces who are aces with really stupid powers, like
Mhm.
I can shoot laser beams out of my eyes. They're not very powerful laser beams. I can entertain the cat. But that's like fear me, I am maybe retinal damaged man. It's like shooting you know just little keychain lasers out of your eyes. Well, it looks impressive, but it's really not that impressive compared to somebody who can cut through a wall with the
Yeah.
lasers. And then we've also we were calling them for a long while Joker aces, but then I came up with knaves over queens. I Since we're doing the British history, I decided that the British decided that people like my character Hearn, who's got a pair of antlers and stag legs, but he can also call the Wild Hunt. Rather than calling
Yeah.
them Joker aces, which is awkward, they were calling them knaves. So it's like you're physically deformed in some fashion, but you've also got really amazing powers.
Mhm.
And then we're adding in um, current day wild cards is starting to call those people jacks. Just because, language evolves eventually, people saying like, "Hey, we don't want to be called Joker aces because we're not just jokers, we're not just aces, we're jacks."
And we don't want to be called knaves because that has negative connotations, and some of us aren't negative.
Negative, yes. And it's also, we're not British.
Yeah. Well, thing. The term knave can be used in this country, at least occasionally.
Yes.
For those of
Occasionally.
us who read too much British fiction.
Yes, which honestly served me in good stead. It was actually fun writing the Captain Flint story for Knaves Over Queens, which was actually a character who I'd created way back for the first Wild Cards game book, and then later on, I think John Joseph Miller and Melinda Snodgrass both wrote him in because we needed to have the Order of the Silver Helix, which was the British ace organization, and then which I also created, and then that went along. And anyway, getting into the writing of it, so I wrote the story. George liked it. He said that I had actually nailed the tone of like 1940s and 50s British military fiction, which it is, and then passed it over to his British editor Jane Johnson, and Jane was very polite and says, "Well, yes, but here are the differences in our shared language." And then she went through, and I was raised with a whole lot of British children's books, and my mom was from Germany, but then had lived for a year in Britain. So actually, I've got a lot of British English mixed with my regular English,
Mhm.
just from early childhood. So I got most of the things except for a whole lot of the subtle ones, which then Jane corrected, and that was well enough that our the British voice actor who read the story, I later on became friends with him on Facebook, and he was rather surprised to find that I was an American because it seemed like the most British story possible.
Who were your favorite British children's authors?
Uh, Joan Aiken was
Oh,
probably my biggest influence, and it's a really funny thing is that Joan Aiken influenced me enough that when I actually started out writing, then I started reading Jane Austen and going, "Damn it, she's used my favorite sentence structure again. What the hell?" And then I suddenly realized, oh, Joan Aiken was a huge Jane Austen fan and scholar. So she had been hugely influenced by Jane Austen, and since I'd been influenced by Joan Aiken, I therefore got influenced by Jane Austen. But then again, one of the greatest stylists in the English language, there are worse people to be influenced by.
yes. Yeah. Joan Aiken is one of my favorites too. And there's a great publishing story about her. Her first book was called All You Ever Wanted. Her second book of short stories was More Than You Bargained For. Now, these were very early on in her career, and they were eventually published as an omnibus volume, which the British called All and More. And then they did a paperback edition of it, but they couldn't fit all the stories into that, so they called it All But a Few, which is, I just think, is a wonderful example of the way publishers' minds can work. They don't
Mhm,
always, but when they have fun, it's just wonderful to look at.
mhm.
But yeah, of course, she did Wolves of Willoughby Chase, which was illustrated by
Yeah,
Edward Gorey in this
yeah.
country, Pat Marriott in England. But she is an amazing writer
Oh, yeah.
and almost completely forgotten over here.
Yeah, which is really really sad. Now I read through all of her books wildly when I got them, and actually I just recently got the collected Armitage stories that I
Mhm.
think put out about 7 years ago, and so went through those, sort of just reminding myself of my favorite bits.
Mhm. The Armitage stories are really a marvelous family story series,
Mhm.
and in the same way that Nesbitt's stories were family stories. They're about how a real family would interact with magic.
Yeah, and Edith Nesbit was also another favorite of mine.
Yeah.
Read the Phoenix and the Carpet and the whole rest of that series and a few other things. Got the Enchanted Castle much later, but
Mhm.
enjoyed it. And actually, it was one of those things where I remembered having started it at the library, and then somebody else checked it out. I basically had looked at it, and then it was gone. And then later on,
Mhm.
I bought it as a young adult, and you know,
Yep. Yeah. Well, one of my favorite lines is from The Phoenix and the Carpet, which is a an admonition to the children, which is, "You should never light a fire with today's newspaper. It will not burn well, and besides, there are other reasons." Which is a wonderful way to think about dealing with people. You tell them something that makes sense to them. It gives them a good reason for it, even if it isn't true. Because the
Mhm,
real reason is so hard would be hard to explain to children.
mhm.
Yes. Anyway, there's so much wonderful British kids literature. Yeah,
Yeah.
we could spend the entire time talking about that, but instead, let's go back to we've got wild cards, we've got gaming. What are you working on? What are you interested? What are you planning to do over the next year or two?
Well, see, I'm finishing up another wild card story, another draft on it, and then I've got a bunch more stories that I'm doing for S5E. Had the Union of the Six, and there's a I think it's like the Secret of the Seven, basically it's a bunch of superhero origin stories, and everyone's kind of excited for them, and I am too. But it's taking I am a research junkie. As you can tell with all of the books behind me,
Mhm,
and so the characters, I've got different historical periods that they're from, and trying to build up a world. So looking forward to doing that. I've got some novels that I've had kind of on the back burner that I just want to write the whole thing, but as I said, I've got a large number of things under contract or under you know people said we'd really like a story from you. It's like, okay, I'm working on that. So there's basically a lot on the plate. Plus then there's just unpacking like 60 years of family possessions into my house here. So there's
right.
I'm it got a little bit stalled on that with the pandemic. After a while, it's like, okay, nobody's going to mind other than me that I've got these boxes in my living room or my bathroom or whatever. But it's a
Mhm.
3,000 square foot house, so I've got plenty of room.
What's the most amusing thing you've found going through the 60 years of stuff? What have you
Hmm.
found? What have you found that's interesting to you in doing that?
Interesting. It's like I've been finding, things that my mother had gotten from basically mementos of my grandmother from her vacation in Hawaii with us, and uh, unfortunately been in the attic and termites had gotten into it, and I'd like saved the book, and I'm going to find where it is, dust it off, and probably get a reproduction
Mhm,
of a non-termite eaten copy of it from
mhm,
off of eBay somewhere. But it's just sort of like going through, various family mementos, old bits of crystal, and so forth. And
mhm,
as my mom's family was from Germany, and she grew up there during the war. But we had, since my grandmother's family, I had some money. I've got a lot of nice old bits of crystal and so forth. And interesting thing is I went to the local junk shop, and I ended up finding a piece of hand cut crystal for $3 that exactly matched my grandmother's pattern. So, case where Like,
Mhm.
okay, cool. My grandmother would appreciate it. It's like, now I've got a footed dish that goes with the round bowl and looks like it would have always been here. And now I've just added that to the
Mhm.
case.
Yes. I come from a family that were, we could say they were hoarders, or we could say that they just kept things. Um,
Mhm.
what I'm using as my wallet currently is, he says, getting that into the,
Ah, very nice old silver cigarette case, it looks like.
yes, with the, it works very well as a Faraday cage to keep anybody from stealing my credit cards.
Oh, that's an excellent plan. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that there are a lot of people who hoard stuff. I'm having to deal with my dad's collection of things. Is that um I hate with all the books behind me to be getting rid of my dad's books, but sometimes it's like, oh look, 3 copies of the same book for investing in the stock market in the 90s. I don't need any of these.
Yeah,
Um,
yes. I'm
so
going through some of that too. I still have most of my father's books. I still even have a bunch of his canceled checks from the 1950s, which I need to throw away. But I found all his passports
yeah.
back
So
in the 40s.
there are lots of that. Some things are family mementos. Some things are just the okay. Why did we keep this? Probably because somebody was moving and didn't have time to sort through it, and it just
Mhm.
went into a
Yeah,
box.
yeah,
And
yeah.
actually, that was one of the weird things is that there was a gift I got my sister on the trip that I did out to Kansas City, and I think I stopped at the Lewis and Clark Museum, got a couple of things, and didn't find them at the end of the trip, and didn't find them, and finally thought, oh, they must have bounced out of the car when we stopped at a gas station or something, and was annoyed, but then put it out of my head. And then it turned out that after I had packed and moved, and then was unpacking, I just looked at this crumpled paper bag in the bottom of a box, pulled down, it's like, oh, it's the
There they
Christmas
are.
stuff that I got for my sister, and it had obviously got stuffed in the back of some corner, misplaced,
Mhm.
packed while being misplaced, and it wasn't until I was finally sorting it here that it came out.
Yeah, yeah. That's. I'm very wary of throwing away old boxes. You know,
Mhm.
in part because my father never threw anything away, and my mother didn't either. But occasionally, I I have found interesting things like the original manuscript of the Book of the Law by Alex
Yeah.
Crowley. Um,
I know that when my dad got into a throwaway bit, he probably threw away my first John Bellairs trilogy when I was a kid, and I was
oh,
always feeling kind of bad about that because John Bellairs was my favorite author. So it's like,
mhm,
oh well, I can always reacquire the paperbacks if I really feel like it.
yes.
But yeah, I was gonna say influences The House with the Clock in its Walls and uh,
Mhm.
The Face and the Frost, which actually I think I bought a copy of that from you at
Yes.
one point.
Um,
It's a
it's a wonderful book, and we I was familiar with it, and I discovered that a local remainder outlet
mhm.
had hundreds of copies, and we ended up selling enough of them so that we gave Bellairs a royalty check for the remainder copies that we sold. And in fact, we ended up supplying the copies that Ace used to reprint it.
Mm.
But it's now become a fairly valuable book, not as valuable as The House with the Clock in Its Walls, which is
Yeah.
the only copy of the first edition that you can find online that I've been able to find online at the moment is going for around $900.
Yeah, that's a little bit crazy. I think the only first edition of Belair's that I've got is Saint Fajetta and Other Parodies.
Hmm.
My Face in the Frost I ended up lending to a friend, and then he moved, and so he says it's still somewhere in his library. He just hasn't found it.
Yeah.
But I ended up then buying Magic Mirrors, which had
Mhm.
uh, the Dolphin Cross, which is the unfinished sequel in there. So I was able to reread it, and then the fragmentary sequel.
Yep. I was at a college bookstore, book sale, to benefit a college in the DC area, and I saw that a young girl, under preteen, had found a copy of the Pet and the Shove flick in there and was planning to buy it. And I talked to her and her parents and said, I will give you $20 if you let me buy that copy.
Mm.
And the parents said, it's your call, to the girl. And she did let me buy it. So I have a first edition of that, which was it's a wonderful book, and that was the first copy I'd seen outside a library.
Mm.
But we all get our stories of the things we find, and it's always interesting to see what turns up in people's worlds.
Oh yeah. I think some of the most let's see. Well, I've got a first edition of The King in Yellow, which is a nice one. It's actually on my shelf opposite here, as I'm looking
The
at that.
Neely's Prismatic Library with the dragon on the back. That's
It's the one with the King in Yellow on the front and the torch down on the spine.
okay. That I think is the second.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think it's a second. It may be the second printing, but it was. I think there's the one with the salamander on it is the original first edition.
Yeah.
Though I think they changed a line in it where it's like there was like some small bit of blasphemy. It's like in the middle of the King in Yellow and all of these things about
How
unspeakable
evil the book is, and
somebody had to Bowdlerize a god or damn or something like that.
yes,
But
it's amazing the things that happen with books, and that one is a particularly difficult book to figure out the true first on. It was, for years. People argued back and forth.
yes. Oh, and since you're a bookseller, I've got a copy of the Dulac illustrated Rubaiyat
Mhm,
with one half uncut pages. So basically there's like two translations
mhm,
in it. And so somebody it had uncut pages originally when it was printed. Somebody cut the pages to read the first half, but didn't cut the pages of the second half, which had the
mhm.
other translation. So it's a question of is is it uncut? Is it half cut? What is the proper antiquarian language for it? Was like half uncut pages.
I would say half uncut pages. I don't know what other people would say. Uh, some pages uncut
Hmm.
is a safe thing to say.
Yeah.
Uh, I was just looking through an auction catalog, and there's an auction that's about to happen of one of the signed copies of that, with signed by Dulac. Yes, which it's amazing how many of those illustrated books had signed editions that we never hear about because they don't get offered for sale very often. Yes. So, what are those books behind you? Can you give us a quick sort of read at it?
Okay. Well, I think
What the
that
shop have it?
the ones that I will actually point at is probably my most useful and not particularly rare, but I see, point up to them. The two volumes here that I'm pointing
Yes,
to.
I was noticing.
Okay, those are Westermark's Ritual and Belief in Morocco, which were a couple
Oh,
of books that I originally had been shown by my Middle Eastern Studies professors back uh, co- in college. I was getting my undergrad in anthropology and creative writing at the same time. So anyway, my anthropology professor, Richard Randolph, had pointed those out to me and was like, "Oh, wow, this is cool." And then I looked at the library copies at UCSC, and then uh, a few years later in Old Town, Sacramento, there was a antique bookshop that had a copy of those, and I bought them. They were a bit expensive, but they were the university press from the 60s. Um, and they're absolutely amazing books because it has a lexicon of all of the ritual curses from Morocco and how to construct an Arabic ritual curse. And so it's like, it's it's like drop down menu. May Allah curse you, and blah blah blah, and then finally like the final epithet that I think that when there are many of them that are off color. There are many of them that are racist, but I think that the one that I can say that is probably not, but is still horribly insulting. Oh, son of a dead donkey,
Mhm.
which I think was a like okay, not just calling someone an ass, but a dead one.
Yes, well, it would be more interesting even as son of a dead mule.
Hmm.
Yes. But that's a whole other story, I'm sure. But
Yeah,
yes.
but so and there's lots of interesting gin
Mhm.
legends and various other things there, which you know I've found some friends who, told me some stories because, they grew up in North Africa. It's like, oh yeah, that's the actual stories that everyone tells.
Yes, yes. Karen asks if there's a bookstore in Tonopah. There may not be a bookstore, but there will be a dealer's room at the convention. And
Yeah,
you're more likely to find interesting science fiction and fantasy books through that than through most bookstores.
yeah. Now, actually, bookstores is we actually had a bookstore in Lovelock, Nevada. My family, we ran Treasures bookstores. Like my dad had collected enough books to open a bookstore, and then was being eaten alive by storage costs. And then I said, well, it turned out there was the old Seroptimus Club that was next to the old bank building. And my sister and I bought those together and moved all of my dad's books in and set things up to be Treasure's bookstore,
Mhm,
which was run for a number of years until, unfortunately, somebody arsoned the bar next door. The fire spread and it burned down the
mhm.
bookstore. And that was huge family tragedy. And so I think that's probably what kicked off my father's heart attack. But
Yeah.
that was very very bad thing, but I do know about running a
Yeah.
bookstore.
Well,
That
and as you know, I've had experience with that myself. My
yes,
aphorism about running a bookstore is it's a terrible way to make a living, but a great way to make a life.
yes,
And
yeah,
pretty
it's a
much
lot of
everyone
fun.
I know who's run a bookstore agrees with that.
Mhm. Yeah, I loved being able to find people, books that they wanted, or it's like had this like little girl come in with her um grandmother, and I she said, well, I like horror stories like this, that, and the other, and I ended up finding it was one of the old Alfred Hitchcock's kids anthologies
Oh,
from the
yes.
60s, and I said, here, I read this when I was younger. This has a lot of good stories in it. You will like it. And she was like, ooh, cool.
The Haunted Mansion was one of them, or something like
I've
Haunted.
got Ghostly Gallery. This
Yeah,
was a different one. I think this may have been the Haunted Mansion. It was one that I was tempted to grab for my own bookshelf, but I'm thinking I don't have time to read all this. And there's a 10-year-old here who likes horror. That she can have it.
yeah. No. Eh, the other thing that we often talk about with a used bookstore is being an adoption service for books.
Hmm.
Finding the right person for the book is just such a wonderful feeling. We're having several people who fell in love, who loved the Hitchcock juveniles, talking
Yeah.
about it in the comments. And Kevin Stanley points out there's a Whitney's bookshelf a short walk from the convention center in Tonopah. So
Oh, excellent.
there, there is, there are more books. There are always more books.
Yeah.
Well, we're soon going to be coming to the end of our time, but I'm going to ask if there's anything else you want people to know about you or about the convention, Kevin.
Well, honestly, Tonopah is a pretty fascinating town. Actually, but I didn't mention, I think we talked about it beforehand, is that there are lots of ghost stories in Tonopah with the lady in red haunting the Mizpah Hotel, and supposedly also the ghosts of miners who got double crossed digging into the safe that's in the basement. There basically it was the vault that's in the basement of the Mizpah Hotel was where they were keeping a whole bunch of money, and then miners dug into it from below, and they found out about this because, well, there was a tunnel into the vault and two dead miners below it who'd obviously been double crossed, and that's supposedly a couple of the other ghosts that are there. And so I think I've been put onto the ghost hunting program. That should be interesting. I've written up ghost hunters for a number of stories that I've done for various anthologies, both at White Wolf, and we even had ghost hunters in Mississippi Roll. And actually, that was my story, Find the Lady, which I won the Darrell Award for a couple of years ago, 2019, for best novella.
I've often wondered, what type of gun do you use for hunting ghosts?
Depends, I'd say, on what mythology you're going about, what actually can hit ghosts.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
And actually, I will say that without too many spoilers, there was an amazing twist on that done with the movie Winchester, which, of course, is about ghosts and guns. And so I will say that the ghost and guns mythology is really, really well done in Winchester.
Okay. I have never seen the movie, so.
Yeah, Helen Mirren playing Sarah Winchester, and I actually got to see it in San Jose. Unfortunately, they'd already closed the Century 21, which is next to the Winchester Mystery House, so it was at the Santana Row, which is across the street. But it was really fun to go see the movie Winchester right next to the Winchester Mystery House.
It would be, yes. All right, it looks like we've got Bob back, so we can have him. We can hand off to him to let him talk about the things that are upcoming from B Cubed Press. And I will say thank you, Kevin, for spending this hour with me. I hope that everyone who was hanging out had a good time, and hope you can come to Westercon. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be there. Karen's going to be there. Bob's going to be there. Kevin's going to be there. It's going to be a chance to have all the B Cubed excitement you could possibly want.
It will be fun. I'll have everything there except an anthology with a Kevin Andrew Murphy story in it. But I will never give up hope. Someday, we all know it could happen. But we will have a fine time. We're BQ Press has had the privilege of publishing. You bring up your partner, bless her heart. She's leading off our next release with yoga positions for the Protest Diaries. We having had went down to Portland and played in the tear gas and the mace and the rubber bullets and the shock troops. It was a fun time for all. And we came back inspired to put out a book called The Protest Diaries. And Karen had one of the first stories picked and story that is leading it off. So we are very proud of that. And there's a whole bunch of other things coming. We have the Alternative Holidays with Alicia Hilton is editing for us, that we will have both that and the Protest Diaries out on the table. And I was so tempted. I loved all the discussion about the Shared World anthologies, because BQ Press has its first Shared World anthology in process called Scott's Planet. Our entire premise was built on a story I had in a old anthology about 15 years ago, one of my first sales. But I was in it with Harry Turtledove. It's not like I worship the ground he walks on, because I don't think his feet actually touch the ground as he hovers through life. He's just he's brilliant. But the premise is that the Faster Than Light Drive made everybody really go, let's spread out and explore the galaxy. And all of a sudden they found out that all these little colonies and groups of people dropping off supplies and picking up anything worthwhile wasn't very economically feasible. And so the galaxy shrank back to that which was um, useful, things that made money. For example, how many people would have been interested in going to America from Europe and Spain if there hadn't been fish, lumber, and
Gold.
gold? Yeah, you had to have something that makes it worthwhile. So this is the story of one of the planets that is out there that the people made the decision to stay, and we call it Scott's Planet. And it's somebody say something.
We're getting echo.
Oh, okay. It was a very it's a fun anthology, and we're still working on it. So upcoming from BQ Press next week, we have appearing the
Oh, I've always loved.
yeah. Oh, brilliant writer. I mean, or producer, or editor, or artist. I can't remember which one they do, but I'm sure if they're here, they're going to be brilliant. The And then we're going to be on July 4th. We're going to be in Tonopah for Westercon, where we're going to have the one and the only Voss Foster with us, and he's going to help us. He writes, among many other wonderful things, he writes gay romance. And so he's going to walk us through the concept. This is what exactly is gay romance. Of course, with me, you'd have to ask me the question, what is romance? Until I realized one day, I don't know. So I read one and said, oh, there's a lot of science fiction romance out there.
Oh, there is.
Yeah, that they call fantasy. In fact, I found out I had published a romance novel and with B Cubed and never known it. But it's a fun world.
Yeah, well, my story, Find the Lady for Mississippi Roll, that won the award, that's a romance. So
hey, there you go, Kevin. You are in the club.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's going to happen. We're going to be at Tonopah on July 4th weekend. We're going to be up there with some really wonderful people. Kevin Sandley puts on a great convention. Mm-hmm. And Arlene is Busby has got some excellent programming. I've been reading through it, looking at it. It's going to be a good place to be. It's going to be a small convention, if I understand, but it's going to be a fun one in an area that is rich, absolutely rich with things to do. Whether or not you mentioned turquoise mining, that was a new one for me. I didn't know you could mine turquoise in Tonopah.
Because of the darkness, one of the best places for stargazing in the country.
Yeah. I saw that.
Actually, the turquoise mine, interesting thing is that the turquoise there is the turquoise that was used by Tiffany. So the Tiffany blue is the turquoise from the Tonopah Tiffany turquoise mine.
Well, that is going to be...
And the less nice connection there's also a shack with graffiti all over it where the Manson family stayed, just outside the turquoise mine. So, Tiffany's and the Manson family.
You just gotta say that there's some combinations. I mean, I can buy peanut butter and chocolate. I'm just not sure I can buy the turquoise Manson family shop. No. Well, anyway, Tom, as always, you have brought new and unique ways of looking at people and things, and I appreciate it. And Kevin, it's always good to see you, be it at a con or be it on BCube Sunday morning. And because I can't tell you how much fun this is to do when you got people that are just as interesting as you. So that said, be on the lookout for our protest diaries. It's going to be out in a little over a month. Mm-hmm. News alert. before we were talking, there's a small joke going on. It's not a good joke, but when my internet went out for 11 days, it caused me to cancel one of our BCube Sunday morning sessions. So I dutifully go into my spreadsheet and I type canceled, but I typed canceled on the wrong month. So my guest for next week was, I went to look, canceled. Oh, good. So Kevin suggested wonderfully that I have Sean Patrick, say the name again.
Hazlitt.
Hazlitt. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was mentioned in our discussion.
Yeah, and so I said, Hazlitt and Boop, David Boop, one of the really, I don't know if up and coming is if he's past the up and coming stage of his anthology work.
He's best selling with the anthology. Is straight out of I think Tombstone anthologies are doing very, very well. I was just at Launchpad with him last week, so he's quite proud of that.
Yes, I've always liked him, and I've heard nothing bad about his anthologies. So I am on the hunt to put the two of them together on one of these shows. It's just that they're both at cons next week. So next week I will surprise you with a new and happy guest. So that said, thank all of you for coming. And those of you who are watching, I love reading the comments. And if Kevin didn't get it through firm enough, he wants you to know there is a bookstore in Tonopah. And there will also be the dealer's room where I will have all of our BQ books and a few Phyllis Radford books. Irene Radford, she's one of our longtime writers.
And there are tours of the turquoise mines in Tonopah that Kevin Stanley has been putting notes of in the notes area.
A turquoise mine.
Yep.
Cool. Now, is that anything like a Manson family turquoise mine, or is that
one of them?
All righty. Well, guys, I am just excited that I'm taking a few days off and getting down there just a little early and a little late so that I can go enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And if you go by the dealer's room and I'm not there, it's out there because I'm probably scrambling through the dirt somewhere. I'll leave a jar on the table so you can buy a book. I'm a firm believer that will work. And take care. Anything to say goodbye?
See you.
Yeah. See you in Tonopah.
See you in Tonopah.
Yep. Good luck.
See you there, Tom.